There's a photograph of a 10,000-year-old man with dark skin and bright blue eyes. When scientists reconstructed his face in 2018, it broke the internet. Because he was found in a cave in Britain, and everyone just assumed ancient Britons were pale. I mean, obviously, it's Britain. The sun there is practically theoretical. They were wrong. And the reason they were wrong is the same reason your skin looks nothing like your ancestors' skin did 50,000 years ago. Because skin color isn't old, it isn't fixed, it isn't even close to what most people think it is. By the end of this video, you're going to look at your own hand completely differently. Here's what's coming. Vitamin D deficiency turning bones soft enough to bow under a toddler's own weight. A gene variant that's only about 8,000 years old, younger than the pyramids. Neanderthals who went pale through a completely different genetic route than we did. UV radiation literally mutating DNA generation after generation for 50,000 years straight. Folate getting destroyed in your bloodstream like a photograph left in direct sun. Redheads, albinism, and why pale isn't even one single trait, but a pile of unrelated ones wearing the same disguise. And the sun itself, that big, indifferent nuclear furnace 93 million miles away that doesn't know your name and definitely doesn't care if your pelvis fractures during childbirth, quietly rewriting the human genome, continent by continent, for tens of thousands of years. Let's start at the beginning, which is a lot more recent than you'd guess. Here's the fact that breaks people's brains. Dark skin isn't the original skin tone the way we think of an original iPhone color, some default that got upgraded. It's the stable skin tone, the one evolution settled on and kept for the overwhelming majority of the human story. Humanity spent almost its entire existence, over 200,000 years, as one color, clustered near the equator under brutal, unfiltered sun. Sit with that for a second. Every human who ever painted a cave wall, every human who ever buried a loved one with flowers or ochre, every human who ever looked up and wondered what the stars were before roughly 50,000 to 70,000 years ago, every single one of them had dark skin. Not dark for their region, just dark, full stop. There was no other region yet. There was no yet. The palette we now think of as human diversity didn't exist for the first 3/4, maybe more, of our species' timeline. So what changed? People moved. Small groups walked out of Africa generation by generation, drifting north into places with less direct sun, longer winters, weaker light. And here's the thing about skin. It's basically a solar panel with an opinion. Dark skin is loaded with melanin, a natural, built-in sunscreen that absorbs and scatters ultraviolet radiation before it can shred your DNA. Near the equator, where UV is relentless almost year-round, that's not optional. That's armor. But take that same armor to Scandinavia, where sunlight is basically a rumor for half the year, and it becomes a liability. Because skin doesn't just block sunlight, it also uses it. Specific UV wavelengths trigger a chemical reaction in your skin that produces vitamin D, and your body needs vitamin D to absorb calcium and build strong bone. Too much melanin in a low-sun environment is like keeping tinted plastic wrap over a solar panel all winter. Barely any usable light gets through. Barely any vitamin D gets made. So the sun didn't just tan people as they spread across the planet. In the coldest, dimmest regions, it started quietly voting some of them off the island. One weakened skeleton, one difficult birth, one generation at a time. Vitamin D deficiency sounds mild, right? Like a supplement aisle problem, something you fix with a gummy vitamin and move on. Except left untreated over childhood, it causes rickets, bones so undermineralized they physically bow under body weight, bowed legs, a curved spine, and critically, a softened, deformed pelvis. Now picture that in a hunter-gatherer world with no hospitals, no C-sections, no epidurals, just you, your body, and whatever your bones can manage. A woman with a distorted pelvis could die in labor, and so could the child. That's not mild. That's a natural selection-level catastrophe, repeating itself across generations until the population's genetics shift under the pressure.
So, lighter skin, a worse sunscreen but a much better light absorber, became a genuine survival advantage the further populations moved from the equator. Simple story, right? Not quite, because skin isn't only protecting your bones from a deficiency, it's also protecting something else entirely. Folate, a B vitamin that's essential for healthy fetal development, especially the formation of the neural tube in early pregnancy. Here's the twist. UV radiation doesn't just make vitamin D, it also destroys folate circulating in your bloodstream, almost like sunlight slowly bleaching a photograph left on a windowsill. So near the equator, dark skin isn't only sunburn protection, it's a folate shield. Strip away that melanin in a high UV environment and you risk serious birth defects. But push too much melanin into a low UV environment and you risk the bone-crushing vitamin D problem instead. Evolution wasn't hunting for a better skin color, like there was a correct answer waiting to be found. It was triangulating a brutal trade-off between two completely different ways your body could fail. One favoring dark skin, one favoring pale skin, and the winning answer depended entirely on how far you'd wandered from the equator. Evolution, ladies and gentlemen, not an optimizer, just a very committed compromise machine, running the same grim arithmetic on every population that ever migrated. Quick gut check. Look at your hand again. That exact shade you're looking at? It's the current temporary answer to a math problem your ancestors' bodies were running for thousands of generations. It's not finished. It was never finished. It's a snapshot of an ongoing negotiation. Keep that in mind because it's about to get a lot weirder. Okay, so pale skin evolved once humans left Africa for northern latitudes. Tidy story. Done, right? Except it didn't happen once. It happened multiple times, independently in different populations, through different genetic mutations. European pale skin and East Asian pale skin, for instance, are largely driven by different genes. Convergent evolution basically hit re-roll on the genetic dice and landed on visually similar outcomes through completely separate paths. And it gets stranger from there. Neanderthals, a different human species entirely, one that lived in low-sun Europe for hundreds of thousands of years, also evolved pale skin. But not through our genes, through their own unrelated mutations built from scratch in a totally separate lineage. Two different species, same sun, same problem, independently arriving at the same disguise, using different genetic tools to do it. That's how strong this pressure is. It doesn't just shape one species' DNA, it reshapes the DNA of anyone who stands in that light long enough, regardless of what species they technically are. UV doesn't just tan skin in the moment. Over deep time, it's a steady, constant source of the raw mutations that natural selection has to work with in the first place, quietly sunburning the genome itself, one generation at a time, whether or not anyone's even paying attention. And here's the twist that actually rewired scientific assumptions almost overnight, the same discovery we opened with. In 2014, researchers extracted and sequenced the genome of Cheddar Man, that roughly 10,000-year-old skeleton discovered in a cave in Somerset, England, back in 1903. For over a century, everyone just assumed early Britons were pale. Cheddar Man had dark skin, and strikingly, piercing blue eyes. That combination shouldn't feel shocking today. Dark skin and blue eyes aren't mutually exclusive, they're controlled by largely separate genes. But it demolished a quiet, unspoken assumption a lot of people carried, that British and pale were somehow the same ancient package deal. The gene variants responsible for widespread pale skin in Europeans? They're recent. Genuinely recent. Some of the key variants are estimated to have swept through European populations only within the last 8,000 years or so, an evolutionary blink of an eye compared to a 200,000-year-old species. Which means for thousands of years after humans had already reached chilly, low-sun Europe, they were still walking around dark-skinned. Pale skin wasn't an immediate requirement for survival there. It took time and a very specific sustained pressure for those genes to actually spread through the population. So what flipped the switch?
Here's the part that recontextualizes everything. Agriculture. Once populations shifted away from hunting wild game, which is naturally rich in vitamin D, especially from fatty fish and organ meats, toward farming grain-heavy diets, they lost a major dietary backup source of vitamin D. Suddenly, skin had to work a lot harder to manufacture vitamin D from sunlight alone because the food on the plate wasn't covering the gap anymore.
That dietary shift is thought to have accelerated the spread of pale skin genes across agricultural Europe, meaning your skin color might have less to do with the dramatic image of leaving Africa and marching into the cold, and a lot more to do with something as unglamorous as the invention of bread and porridge. Evolution doesn't care about narrative drama, it cares about what's on the menu. And once you understand this trade-off, a bunch of other traits suddenly make sense. Red hair and very fair, freckle-prone skin cluster heavily in places like Ireland and Scotland, some of the lowest sunlight real estate on Earth, because that particular genetic variant is an even more extreme light-absorbing strategy for an even dimmer environment. Meanwhile, populations in places like the Arctic, where the sun is scarce but traditional diets are loaded with vitamin D-rich fish and blubber, never needed to go nearly as pale because the dietary backup that failed European farmers never disappeared for them in the first place. Skin color, in other words, isn't a single sliding dial from dark to light. It's the visible residue of dozens of separate local negotiations. Sunlight, diet, latitude, and time, all layered on top of each other across different populations, on different continents, on completely different timelines. So here's the big picture. Skin color isn't ancient, it isn't fixed, and it certainly isn't symbolic of anything deep about who's more evolved or more original. It's a shallow, recent, local adaptation to sunlight and diet, refought independently across continents in at least two separate human species, and it's arguably still adjusting today. Every racial hierarchy human beings have ever built, every myth about purity, every ranking system, every arbitrary line drawn on a map of human worth, sits on top of a trait that is younger than agriculture, younger than the wheel, younger than most of what we casually call civilization. You didn't inherit a color. You inherited a 50,000-year-old argument with the sun. And your skin, right now, today, is just where that negotiation currently stands.